The impressive reporting of our accomplished guest has potentially saved lives from coast to coast. He's uncovered gaps in safety and shared emotional stories that have driven policy changes. Joining us is Kris Van Cleave, the Senior Transportation and National Correspondent for CBS News. Kris's coverage of automotive safety has earned him 2 Emmy nominations for investigative reporting. We meet him at the intersection.
This is The Intersection with Governor's Highway Safety Association CEO Jonathan Adkins.
Well, Kris, thank you for joining us today. This is really exciting for our audience. You know, you've covered transportation, then you covered Congress, and lucky for us, you're now back to covering transportation a bit. So tell us a little bit about the journey of that and a little bit more about your background before you got to CBS.
Sure, Jonathan. Great to be with you. I've been the transportation correspondent 2 different times at CBS News but covering the beat for about the last 10 years. I had a break there for a little over a year where I covered Congress, but even then still had sort of a foot in the transportation space. So I've been doing that in one way or another for CBS News since 2015. Before that, I was a local news reporter in Colorado Springs, San Diego, and Washington, D.C., where I was the 7 on your side consumer investigative reporter, actually. And then I got started at a television station in Los Angeles as the technology producer.
Well, we're lucky to have you back. And it's interesting that investigative piece, right, has stayed with you, because I'm thinking about your work that led to the Modernizing Seatbelt Safety Act. A huge provision that was included in the bipartisan infrastructure law from a couple of years ago that is going to protect children and others in the back seats. That was a really big deal. And frankly, it wouldn't have happened, Kris, if it had not been for your reporting. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the journey of that, like what started that, and then how did you find you have the passion, but how did you find the momentum in this sort of challenging media age to continue that great coverage?
Well, it starts with having a great team. And I was teamed up with a really fantastic investigative producer from our I unit on that story. And it started with reading about a single case. And we then got curious. How big of a problem is this? And as we dug into it, it was clear that the auto industry was aware of this issue. And basically, the way vehicle seats like the one I'm sitting in are designed, there's a recliner mechanism. It tends to be on one side of the seat. As we dug and dug and dug, we were able to get a rough estimate that these crashes, while they're not super common, about 1 a week, safety advocates believe results in the fatality typically of a child in the back seat. And we learned, as we got more and more information, more and more documents, the auto industry has been aware of it for decades, and the cost to fix it, when identified years ago, was in the order of $1 or so. So it is something that could be fixed, but the seats met every federal regulation. The strength standard for a vehicle seat dates back to the 1960s, and we found a banquet chair can pass that standard, even though it is a far weaker standard than the one for the seatbelt.
16-month-old Taylor Warner was riding in the back seat of her family's minivan 5 years ago when it was rear-ended at 55 miles an hour.
And when I looked and I realized that there was blood coming out of her face, I knew that something else was wrong.
Taylor was in her car seat behind her father. His seat broke and struck Taylor in the face, killing her.
And it was all because of some stupid car that we thought was the safest thing we could, get for our family to protect them.
Crash tests show what can happen when a seat collapses. The driver is launched backwards and slams into the child's face. Drivers can also be injured or killed.
We found the Warner family in Colorado who are willing to tell their story. And what I had learned as an investigative reporter over the years, often it just takes you to get that one story on the air, and then you can suddenly more people are willing to talk, and you learn about other cases and other cases and other cases. And that's exactly what happened for us. We were able to put a story on the air in October of 2015, and it had a couple of voices. It was shocking and troubling. And that prompted more people to reach out to us. It allowed us to continue to tell this story. Eventually, some lawmakers, Senator Ed Markey in particular, saw our story on the air and was shaken by it. He and Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut began pushing legislation. It took multiple tries over several years. I mean, we were working on this story for 8 years before it was signed into law and NHTSA was supposed to act. NHTSA has been slow to finish this proposed regulation. We know it's in the works. They've missed the deadline to get it done. We remain hopeful that, with continued coverage, that this new regulation gets written. But just getting it, the attention to lawmakers and then enough traction for it to become legislation took us years. And I'm fortunate that I work for broadcasts that were invested in this story and allowed us to continue to report the story again and again and again with follow-up after follow-up after follow-up.
Yeah, you're very gracious to acknowledge your team and acknowledge the network. I did a little homework. I'm not an investigative reporter, but I did a little bit of digging as well from folks that were very much involved in this fight, and both indicated, Kris, that it was your persistence. Somebody used the term "tough as nails," which I think is great because we really need that in journalism, and it's certainly benefited safety. And you mentioned couple things that are really interesting. We need NHTSA to do the rulemaking. We're waiting on an impaired driving rulemaking, which will eventually lead to drunk driving not being an option anymore. We will eliminate drunk driving. This improvement that you mentioned is overdue. So GHSA certainly stands with safety advocates, and we're gonna get these rules written. So thank you very much for that focus. You also mentioned that it was hard to find people to talk about this and families. I wonder, sort of from your perspective, like how do we engage more families, or how do we make these stories more about people and less about numbers, technology? Any thoughts or any advice you would have for us in roadway safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard for us to tell a story that resonates without real characters, without human, real people that have been impacted by something. And we did a story earlier this year, and it was really a follow-up to a story we had done years before on the female-sized crash dummies. And a couple of lawmakers, four senators, all women, had pushed legislation, the She Drives Act, I believe is what they call it, to mandate that these things be put into use, because they've been developed and sort of in the approval process now for years. That story only worked because there was a really compelling mother who lost her daughter and was willing to tell her story. Her daughter was, if I recall right, barely 5 feet tall. And, there is data that shows that particularly small people are more likely, and particularly women, more likely to be significantly injured or killed in accidents. That mom being willing to tell her story opened up the conversation to be able to look at this potential safety tool that is not in use currently in U.S. auto testing. So having people that can tell their story really does help make it possible to get a story that isn't just numbers and facts and things that people's eyes sort of glaze over.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the most passionate people I've ever met are mothers who've lost a child. Dads too, but it seems to be, obviously there's MAD, but there are a lot of other survivor advocacy organizations, and it's people that have lost their children and they don't want other families to go through that. And that is a powerful story. It stops us in our tracks, right? We put our phone down, we listen, because it's easy to identify with that. So you make a really good point. Technology is important, but we still have to lead from a place of people first, right?
Yeah, I think when we talk about, is there a story that we can do on something, my first question is always, who are the characters? Who are the people that make that story real to the audience? And then what are the visuals? Because television is a visual medium, we've got to think about how do we visually tell that story? That's less important for, for an online publication or a newspaper. But, for us, it's twofold. It's not only do we need that person that makes things real, or many people that make it real, depending on, what you're working on, but also what are the visuals? And I think about part of what really almost haunted me on the seatback story is there's a piece of crash test video where you clearly see the seatback collapse and strike the infant-sized test dummy in the face. And, like that has stuck with me for years, because it really shows you the danger in a way that's unmistakable.
You never forget that, right?
Right, you don't. And when I look at stories, we've done some pieces on like slow down, move over laws. AAA did some research that found that nearly 40% of people aren't following those laws. That's a data point that's not a story, but it's a data point that led us to, okay, are there examples? Well, AAA said they studied video, so they were able to send us that video showing, who was following the law and who wasn't on some of the stretches they looked at. It happens that there are a number of these incidents that are caught on tape because of all of the dash cameras and things. That gets us some good visuals. Then we need a character. We found characters. We have a story.
Yeah, everything is so much has changed. Everything has changed in a lot of ways, but that storytelling and that need really hasn't changed. You referenced technology here a little bit, and I want to kind of pivot to that because I do kind of think of you as a cyber guy as well. You've been nice enough over the years to interview me a couple times, and I think about now AI. It's changing everything that we do. It's a topic du jour. How's it impacting your reporting?
Well, I'm a big believer in that my reporting, what we write, what we put out on CBS News or on cbsnews.com, that's written by me or one of my producers as a team effort. We're not using AI to do the work of the journalist. I think where AI can be really helpful to us is when it comes to identifying trends, going through, thousands of pages of documents when you're looking for a couple of key phrases or certain things, or to find a trend in data. So I think it can be very helpful as a tool to sort of speed up, getting the footprint of data or a summary of things, but you also can't trust it completely to get everything right. So you're still checking it yourself. But you look at some of these accident databases where it's, thousands of fields of data. AI can help you make sense of that faster than, my brain can, sort and build a spreadsheet and all of that. I think as a sort of a force multiplier with oversight, it can be very helpful to making the reporting process more efficient.
Yeah, we use it for things like, we're looking at 57 state highway safety plans. And not that long ago, we'd have to literally go through and look for a great example of a drowsy driving funded program. And now we can just use AI and get that information. But it's not foolproof, right? You still have to keep doing that checking, or you'll get yourself caught. And we've all seen examples of that, right? Think about AI. I'm thinking about AI, but I'm also thinking about you being based in Phoenix. Every time I go to Phoenix on a work trip, I'm a big Waymo person. I like it because of the safety data. I like the cleanliness of it. I'm an introvert, and so I don't always want to talk to somebody. And so I kind of enjoy that as well. And so I'm curious what your reporting is finding out, not just about Waymo, but about the industry in general. And again, thinking of it from a people perspective, like what are people telling you about AVs?
Yeah, so Waymo's been on the streets of Phoenix since 2018, in various capacities and iterations. So, as a driver in Phoenix, I don't know that I even notice them so much anymore so than any other vehicle on the road. So in that sense, they've become just part of the landscape there in a pretty remarkable way. the Waymos and the other self-driving vehicles are going to be held to a higher standard in people's minds, and likely that's probably fair, right? It's a new technology that still has to prove itself. Waymo has really good internal data they believe shows their vehicles are far safer than human drivers, but you're still in a vehicle with no one operating it. So you do have to be better. And clearly those vehicles are still learning. We've seen that in Atlanta and in Austin dealing with school buses this year, where Waymo says it was a software update. Whatever the issue was, the cars weren't stopping the way they should around school buses when they had their red lights and stop signs activated. So my experience with the Waymos has been largely positive. I think that it operates as well or better than a ride share that you hop into, ride hailing app that you hop into with a human driver. But clearly the technology still has some things that it's learning that it doesn't do right. And a human driver probably would.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I have to tell you that I get a little frustrated. I have a couple friends who I love, but anytime there's a Waymo blip, right? We're not talking, there haven't been fatalities. There's a blip in the news. I get the message on social media like, did you see this? Did you see this? Yes, I did. They have to address that. They have to work on that. We've got to perfect it. But what I don't hear from people is the 110 people a day who die in traffic crashes, the 15,000 traffic crashes there are typically every day in America. And so trying to sort of scale some of that, we can't, you can't always have it's not always going to be perfect, right? But it's got to be pretty close to that. And people are certainly watching. I'm finding that the more people experience the technology, the more comfortable they are with it. It takes a minute, right? The first time you're in a vehicle without a driver, like, what is this? It definitely can take a bit. And so I appreciate your perspective. And I appreciate your perspective. And you're a big picture guy, right? You're covering a lot of transportation issues. So what are we missing? Like, what's the big story out there in transportation that maybe I'm not thinking about or some of my friends and colleagues aren't thinking about?
Up until the middle of this year, I would have said, the aging air traffic control infrastructure and just how outdated some of that technology is. We've had a really clear reminder this year of where that technology has fallen short. I think on the roads, it's autonomy and what that will do for the economy. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of focus on the Waymo that gets confused in a traffic circle. I don't know if collectively we're paying attention as closely to what, sort of the next steps down the road mean when you don't need the rideshare driver, when you don't need the truck driver. And what does that mean for the economy as a whole? And what does that mean for safety? Yes, the Waymos seem to operate better than human drivers, but they're still interacting with human drivers. Human drivers are still going to be on the roads. Do you gain the same? Can you really get the safety gains that you want while humans are still driving around the cars? Like if they can successfully engineer out human error out of the self-driving vehicles, you still have humans around them. And so I think some of that danger is still there. I think the other story that I think needs to be thought about, and this is an accountability one, is just how long it takes our regulators to draft these regulations that either have been mandated by Congress or have been in the works for years. They consistently miss deadlines, and these are safety deadlines. These are life and death issues that, should it take you instead of 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years to write a regulation?
Yeah, and it's bipartisan. That's the thing that's is frustrating. It's been no matter which administration, we have seen that, and it's more than frustrating. It's really maddening. Thinking back about the technology coming, and I've said this before, but I felt like for the last 15 years we've been saying that self-driving cars are going to take over in 2 years. And of course, that hasn't happened. What are you thinking about the time frame? Like, when are some of these issues that you're talking about potentially going to hit?
Well, I think autonomy is, particularly when we're talking about vehicles and on the roads, is really hard. And I was thinking about this, and that Waymo invited us along when they were working on developing their freeway driving service. And they thought they were somewhere 65 to 80% of the way there when we rode with them. It was a whole other year before they closed that gap to start like limited availability of freeway driving with passengers. So this from, a company that's been doing self-driving cars for 8 years at this point, if not longer. And just to make that step from surface streets to freeway, that last portion, it took a year. And they are probably the most advanced self-driving firm, most experienced out there. This stuff is really hard. And it's really expensive. I think those are the challenges with adoption. We'll see if the Tesla robotaxi concept can get to the point of reliability that Tesla wants, that Waymo is seeing, that regulators will probably want. Might that be a lower cost option? The biggest barrier to adoption is going to be cost and people's comfort. Like you say, when people ride it for the first time, they're apprehensive. In my experience has been, and I like when people come to visit, if they've not been in a Waymo, it's like a tourist stop for me now. We take a Waymo, and I enjoyed watching their reaction. And for the first 5 minutes, it's a lot of what's going on. And then almost like clockwork, you'll see them start to slip back to looking at their phone because they get used to the idea. So how do you get that adoption? The way you get that adoption is you make the technology more prevalent, get more people in it. That's not happening as fast as we thought. It's probably not a 2-year, 5-year thing before they're ubiquitous. But is that 20 years from now? Maybe. It certainly seems to be coming.
I feel like we're going to eliminate traffic deaths in my lifetime. I'm older than you are, but I don't want to have to live to be 90 to get there. And so I hope these things move quickly. And I will say, I was sold on Waymo with the data, right? And I looked at the data and felt comfortable. But then once I found out I could listen to my own music in it, I'm sold. I mean, put me in a Waymo any day. If I can pick my own music after having to listen to all kinds of crazy music and ride hailing cars over the years, so that sold me. Hey, Kris, I really appreciate you taking some time. I know how hectic you are and how busy you are, and we really appreciate the time. Thank you for meeting us at the intersection, and thank you to our audience for joining us. Be sure to get notified about future programming at GHSA.org.